Before we can get this raw image back to our architectural or real estate client looking like this, first there's a hugely important step where we take this photo and clean it to look like this. In architectural photography, it is vitally important that you do this step as part of your post-production. If you're missing it, you are seriously missing an opportunity to elevate the quality of your work. So in this video, I'm going to share my thought process and the steps involved in making sure that final image is cleaned, touched up, any distracting elements are removed. We'll look at various different tools and we can deliver to our client the very best possible image whilst remaining faithful to what is actually there in reality. And make sure you stay with me to the end, because it's after we've done this cleanup process that we're then able to use that polishing step that I've alluded to in several videos that just gets our image looking so good, and we can do it with the minimum of fuss when we use the right tools. So let's start in Lightroom before moving to Photoshop. So this is the project that I've been working on for the architect, and all of these images have already been cleaned. They've gone through this process, but the architect has come back to me and he has actually requested a couple more images. So that's a great opportunity to show you how we can get this image here looking more like one of these finished images here. So if I click on this image here, for instance, you can get a sense that I haven't changed reality in any way, but I have made the image nice and clean. There's no distracting elements. And that's what I'm aiming for with this edit. So this is what was delivered to the client as a proof. So this has gone through a basic adjustment, no heavy editing. It's just had a preset applied to it, which gets the image looking pretty good, good enough that the architect can quickly look over all the available photos and select the ones that he wants to license. So what I would like to do before I actually do my finishing touches is change this from the transform auto option. Now I want to actually fine tune this and go for guided. So this was the photo as it was taken. In terms of the geometry, I was just shooting this without a tripod, hand holding all of the shots. Everything I took on this particular day was all handheld, literally so that I could cover as much ground as possible while I was on site, and I could deliver a wide selection of images to the architect. Usually you can draw a guided line straight across the roof line here, but I'm pretty sure that the roof lines are not actually the same height, and so I'm just going to stick to one of the roofs here, and that is going to give us a truer sense of the horizontal lines. Now, the next thing I'd like to do is make sure that I have my histogram fully expanded. Now, you would know if you follow my other work, I don't recommend just grabbing the white slider and start pulling this until that peak hits the right-hand side. It's not a good way of doing things. So I'm just going to bring that back to approximately where it was. A better way to do it is to actually grab the white point, the top right corner of the curve, and move that over just until you start to hit pure white. And from here, I'm just going to right click on the top image. You can see that I do have a bracketed set of 5. It's always a good idea just to make sure you're covering your bases, so that if I did want to recover any shadow detail, I've got options that would enable me to do that. However, I'm pretty happy for this instance just to work with one exposure. It's going to give me enough detail. So I'm just going to go right click, edit in, and I'm going to open it as a smart object in Photoshop. And now that's loaded up, you can see that I have a couple of my favorite tools available to me. The Nik collection, which usually I'll use towards the end of the process, and also 𝗨𝗏𝗔𝗫, which is a huge help for us with architectural photography. And before we get into our cleanup mode, what I'd actually like to do is just lift this shadow of the tree across here. Like, I don't actually think this is a great photo. It's barely a good photo, to be honest. It was just one of over 100 photos I took so I could give that selection to the architect. He's come back with a selection of 19. He's paying me for each and every one of those photos. This is one that he has picked, and that's one of the reasons I like to shoot these other options, because what I think is a good photo, the architect who's not on site with me, might be looking for something specific. Like, he might actually really enjoy the interplay between the shadow of that tree with the building itself. Might be floating his boat, obviously is, because he's picked it. And so now it's up to me to make this photo look as good as possible. And one of the things I want to do is lift that shadow. And I'll show you quickly the best way to do that using 𝗨𝗏𝗔𝗫. It's not the quickest way is in Lightroom, just grab the shadow slider, but that's going to boost the shadows over the whole image. 𝗨𝗏𝗔𝗫 gives us a lot more control. And I promise this is going to be a video about cleaning our image, not recovering shadows. However, I am freestyling this edit so that you can just follow along in real time what problems I'm solving with the editing. And before I go cleaning this image up, I've got to take care of that shadow, just lift it a bit brighter. So if we want to select the shadows, we need to come up to the dark sections. So I can just press D on 𝗨𝗀𝗄𝗃, and that's going to immediately make a selection based on the dark pixels. If we want to refine that, we can just come to tighter values. So D3, D4, we're really starting to select only the tree here. So maybe we'll go somewhere between the two of those, and I can use the slider here to go between 3 and 4. And there's various ways that I could tackle this, but for now, I'm just going to make a selection based on that mask. I'm now going to come down and create a new smart object via copy. So now I have two identical layers, but they are not linked. So if I make changes to the raw on one, it's not going to affect the other, which is exactly what I want. And because I have that selection made from 𝗨𝗨𝗄𝗃, I can just apply that mask. So now if I double click on this, we can come in and we can just lift up those shadows. So I will just grab the shadow slider and boost that. And I'm also going to bring the blacks up as well. I want to make sure that I'm keeping a nice bit of detail in my shadows, so I'm actually going to boost up the clarity as well. Currently you can see how these changes have affected the whole image on a global basis, but if I click OK, it's going to be applied now only to where those shadows were selected. So here's our before, here's our after and after, and if I want to get localized just on that tree or the bottom half of the image, what I can do is put that layer into its own group and put a mask on top of that group. So I've now got a black mask, so everything we just created in terms of boosting those shadows is hidden. And now with a white brush, I can just start to paint in, and it's only going to be revealing those shadows, and that is exactly what I want. So we're just going to brighten that a little bit, and by only applying it over the tree and maybe the cars as well, we're not losing that nice rich contrast between the white and the black that we had higher in the image. So here's our before, here's our after. Okay, and now it's time for our image cleaning or retouching. And what I'm going to be doing here is just removing distracting elements from the photo, which don't really add into the image itself, and just create a little bit of visual chaos, a bit of mess when we look at it. So we can get rid of things like this lamppost here, perhaps the shadow that it's casting as well. Over on the left-hand side here, perhaps the vehicle in the background. This metallic 𝗤𝗏𝗄𝗃 here, we've got this bin as well. The fact that we've got no grass or this bush doesn't carry on here, that's kind of annoying as well. And then on the road, you can just see all this random dirt and paraphernalia that's just creating a kind of visual busyness. It's just a visual distraction when we're trying to take in and appreciate a nice clean photo. Also, there's this little cone here as well. So I just want to take care of all of that, even the aerial on the side of the house. So in my opinion, for this architectural shot, that all needs to go. It's going to give us a really nice clean image. Now, if you're shooting real estate, you need to be careful what you do and don't remove, because obviously you want to be true to the scene that you're representing, which we are being true here. We're just creating a better version of the scene. Okay, so let's dive into Photoshop and retouch this stuff. So I actually have an action set up for this, and anything that you're doing on a regular basis, I strongly recommend set up an action. But I want to show you how we do it from scratch. So it's pretty simple. I just pressed Control, Shift, Alt and E to create a stamped visible layer. I will call it retouch just so we stay nice and organized. Now, if you want to visualize where your dust spots are, there's several ways you can do it inside of Photoshop, but a really great way if you do have 𝗨𝗨𝗄𝗃, which I know a lot of you do, and if you're editing architecture on a regular basis, I strongly recommend you pick that up. But it allows you to actually visualize where those dust spots are, and then you can come in and much more easily see them and take care of them. Now, while I was using the spot healing brush tool here, you can see that it's not doing a great job. And the reason is that I'm currently working with a soft edge. You actually want the edge to be hard on the brush of your healing brush tool. It's going to do a much better job. See that? When I used it like that, it was much, much better. So here's a dust spot here. I'll click once and it's just going to take care of that. Same there. And the only place I'm really looking for dust spots is in the sky, because if they exist down here on the road, for example, you're not really going to see them anyway. So if you have 𝗨𝗨𝗄𝗃, that's a really great way to visualize your dust spots. But let's assume you don't have 𝗨𝗨𝗄𝗃, and we're just going to clean this up the good old-fashioned way. So getting rid of something like this aerial here, a really great tool for doing that is Photoshop's relatively new remove tool. It does a pretty good job, but sometimes you get the odd little pattern anomalies and color anomalies, but you can just come in and deal to them afterwards. Now, while I'm going around taking care of these kind of distractions, I work in a fairly zoomed in state. I normally put a few good tunes on to listen to and just work my way around the image, making sure I've got rid of any distractions. So you can see here that I'm actually retouching the bricks. And how far you go with things like that on your work is entirely up to you. Also, the importance of the photo itself, how big it's going to be reproduced, and also how much the client is paying you. This particular client pays me very well for what I do, and so I want to make sure that the images I send back to him are top quality. So if I see any marks that need to be got rid of, then I'm going to do that. And currently you can see that everything I'm doing is being done with that new remove tool. It really is fantastic. Now, whether or not we remove the lamppost here, that is entirely at my discretion at the moment. But what I'd like to do is actually create two versions. A touched up version where we're going to get rid of these little anomalies that should go. And then I'm going to do another version where I'm also going to get rid of that lamppost. But then if the architect comes back to me and says, hey, Anthony, where the hell's that lamppost gone? I want to be able to go back to a version where the lamppost existed. So I'm going to leave that right until the end. As well as using the remove tool, it is really great using the spot healing brush tool. It really does a great job. You can usually have a brush that's quite a bit bigger than the area you're trying to clean up, and it will leave those pixels that aren't distracting alone and enable you just to come and click over the little things that just catch in your eye. It's actually pretty easy to get lost in the weeds when you're doing something like this, so I would recommend just set yourself a timer, have a time limit in mind, and just go to that. Don't do any more than the time limit you've set. At the very least, it's just going to bring an awareness to how long you're spending doing this kind of retouching. Some of the windows were pretty dirty, so I used a really basic technique where I just marqueed around those windows and painted a gradient over the top using the colors that were already there in the window. And because it's right at the side of the frame, I don't think anyone's going to pull that apart and go, that's not real. Okay, let's deal to this bin over here. And to get rid of this bin, I think we should call on Generative Fill and just see what it can do. So I'm literally just going to select over the bin for now and come over to Edit, select Generative Fill, and just click Generate. I'm not going to give it any prompt. I'm just going to let the AI try and figure this out. And now it's given us three variations, our first one, second one, and third one, and either the second or the third I think is better. I'm not quite sure what's going on over here on the first one. So let's just stick with this second one. That looks pretty good. And from here, I'd like to add some grass into this area here. So I'm going to select it, type grass, and hope that the generative fill can do its thing. Okay, so that's our first option. And you can see that it's being respectful of the fact we've got a shadow going on here. This is the second option with less shadow, and here's the third. Now, these are hard to judge when we're zoomed in this far. So what I'd recommend doing when you're making changes like this is come back out, and then it's easier to judge how this change is playing into the photo as a whole. So that third option, it looks oversaturated. I don't really like that. The second option there with a bit more sun's really nice, and that option also with a shadow is pretty good too. I think I'll just stick with the first option in this case. And now I think it's time to try and get rid of this metallic, gosh knows what it is over here. So again, I'm just going to select it, click generate, and hope it can do its thing. Pretty impressive. I'm quite happy with that. So let's zoom back out and we'll do a little comparison of before and after with that corner there. So here's before and here's after. It's barely noticeable in the whole scheme of things, but if we just look at that corner and look at the before and after, that really is quite a nice cleanup considering AI has done that all for us. Now, you would have noticed that I did that in smaller batches. I didn't just select the whole area and say, figure this out. And I found that the results are better when you don't throw so much at the AI. You just pick certain areas like I did here with the grass, and then we looked at that metal area. Not only is it going to be easier for the AI to actually calculate what should be there, but the pixels that you get back are going to be more accurate. The larger you try and calculate an area for, the more it's going to have to upscale and smear pixels. So if you can work in little concise areas as small as possible, you're going to get better results. Okay, seeing as we're having good success with the generative fill, I think we will carry on with that to try and remove the lamppost as well. But before I do that, I just want to make another stamped visible layer so that I can jump back to this version if the architect does decide that he does still want that lamppost in there. But for now, let's see if we can't get rid of it. Now, I was just about to start working in that section by section way that I described before. However, what I'm going to do here is just select the whole area and see how we get on trying to remove it that way. I don't think this is going to work very well, but let's just give it a try. So I'm going to come down to the generative fill. In fact, actually, let's try content aware fill first. Leave it in auto and just see what Photoshop comes up with for us. And there you go. The once much celebrated content aware tool has really made a nasty job of this. You can see what it's trying to do, but this is not good whatsoever. So I'm going to Control Z to undo that, and we'll see if generative fill can do any better. So we'll go to Edit, Generative Fill, and I'll just click Generate and see if it can work that out. Now, I don't think it's going to work it out because I haven't given it any help whatsoever. No prompt to say remove the lamppost. But it's actually removed the lamppost, but what has it done to the rest of the building? I can already see that it has absolutely ruined the roof here, and you can see this kind of smearing effect that I was talking about, and that happens when we're trying to upscale a larger version. The AI can't handle these large resolutions that we deal with architectural and basically a lot of photography these days. So it's kind of failed there. So let me break it down into smaller chunks and see how we get on. Let's just hide that result for now and go again. So I'm just going to work with this top section here to start with, and I'll ask it to remove lamppost. And it's left us with a little bit of a nubby. So now let's see if we can't select this area and do the same. Remove lamppost. And that first option is absolutely awful. This second one is pretty good in terms of the roof line, as is the third. I'm going to go with this second one here, and we'll just keep working our way down. Although I have just noticed it's also got rid of the drain pipe as well. Ever wish you hadn't started something? I'm starting to like the look of this lamppost in this photo after all. But hopefully you can see from these examples that these generative fill tools aren't necessarily all they're cracked up to be. They are fantastic some of the time. So if we're removing that bin that we did before, great. But it's not doing a good job, so I'm just going to go back to traditional methods for getting rid of this. The clone tool, the heal tool, and that erase tool as well. So let me tackle it in a more traditional way now. So let's just make another stamped visible version of that, and I'm just going to throw those into the bin. Okay, so I'm just going to delete this from the layer I'm working on so that we can reveal the underlying drain pipe, and let's get back to work on this. So literally all I need to do is borrow pixels from this left hand side to paste over this area here. So I'm just going to come down to about here, and I'm going to use the patch tool for this because that's going to allow me to move this over and say borrow from these pixels on the left and paste them to the right. So that's done a pretty good job all the way through there. I'll come back to this area here where we've got these little vents, but for now, let's just work on this area through here. So again, we'll come to a rectangular marquee and just drag that over this area. And then we'll come to our patch tool again, this one here, and then we'll move it over, and we want to borrow the pattern so we look like we have a consistent recurring pattern. Now, if you're just a little bit up or down when you're borrowing, just hold the Shift key, and that's going to constrain that to the same horizontal axis. And now we can just work that left and right until we're happy with the position. And you can see the problem through this area here, which is this tool likes to try and blend the transitions in. And so we don't want to be doing that. So the best way to deal with that is to select all of that area where we had the transition. And I don't recommend you do it with the patch tool itself because you're doing it like that. That's not very accurate. We're going to come back to that marquee selection again. Make sure we get all of that transition that we had up here and down here. Now we can come to the patch tool and slide over, hold the Shift key to constrain it, and that looks like that's going to borrow nicely from there. And now look at that repair we've done there. Much, much better. But we've lost one of these little vents, so the easiest way to deal with that is actually just make a square where we want the vent to be. Again, use the patch tool and then just drag that over the initial vent, and now we have two vents. So that's using the patch tool. I think we'll mix things up just so you guys are getting to see different ways of doing things. For this bottom section here, I think we'll go back to traditional cloning. So again, I'm just going to make a selection I'm going to make sure that I'm not picking up any of the drain pipe here. I'm just going to go to the left of that and just select over the top of the lamppost itself and just give ourselves a little bit more breathing room. Come over, we can select the clone tool here, and we want to make sure that we're aligning the same level. So we can sample from this side by holding Alt and clicking here, and now we can come over, make sure that we're going to line up that vertical that we have here with the vertical we have here. Something like that should be pretty good. And now we click and we just start painting away that lamppost. And we can just introduce some kind of fake shadows pulling from the left-hand side, and we can just keep coming down here. And now into the brickwork. And it's often good to sample from slightly different areas so that it's not completely obvious that you've just cloned from one area. And I'll borrow from the brick pattern here so that we can actually play into the correct brick pattern and build that over just that little area through there. And now I just want to get rid of that little break line between the two. One way to do a nice line nice and quickly is to click in one area, hold Shift, and then click in another, and that will draw that line nice and straight between where you clicked. We can do the same here as well. We could just borrow from the left-hand side, click once, Shift click somewhere else, and there we go, painted up there. And there you go. Thanks to more traditional methods, we've managed to get rid of this lamppost. So here's our before, here's our after, but of course we've still got this shadow we need to deal to, but that in comparison will be a piece of cake. Let's stick with the clone tool for now, line it up, and then all we have to do is paint that area and try not to do what I'm doing, which was go over too far to the right. When you're getting rid of things like this, it's all about matching the pattern that exists before. So there's no point me coming over and sampling from here and then trying to hope that I can match it up. It's not going to work. What we need to do is actually look for an area of pattern that matches. So I'm going to come down here further on the window pane, and that's what I can bring up. I can make sure it matches the pattern up here, and then I will click and start painting. And there's a little bit of shadow down here as well from it, so I need to remove that. So let's have a quick look where we came from and where we've got to. So here's our before and here's our after. And I think you'll agree that this is a marked improvement over our original. Before and after, before and after. That's a nice cleanup. And now because we've worked hard cleaning up that image, we're now able to benefit from the automated workflow that I alluded to in the last video. And that is using either Luminar Neo or Color Efex Pro. You can go either way, but I'm going to show you Luminar Neo, how we can make our image that we just cleaned up look like this. And we can do that in seconds, and we can apply it across our whole architectural photography shoot so that all of the photos are automatically processed, polished, and finished like that. So if you'd like to see how I do that, you can check out that video right there. Thank you so much for watching, guys. I will see you in that one. It's a goodie.